not sending aid to your enemies is now constitutional, or I'm not sure if constitutional is the exact word that should be used, but basically there were appeals, or there were sort of asks of the Israeli Supreme Court to basically stop, or rather uh, basically Israel stopped sending aid to Gaza, and they asked them to stop sending the aid, which the Supreme Court, well, we'll go into what exactly has happened. Then there were some changes, potential changes to the Supreme Court that were just approved by Knesset, so we'll cover a little bit of that, as well as there was a conference on anti-Semitism that Netanyahu spoke at, and I think there are some things that were said there that I think are interesting and would be good to comment on, as well as there was a strike in Lebanon, specifically in the more northern parts where Hezbollah still has some presence, which is pretty much unprecedented since the start of the ceasefire. And Putin has some plans for Ukraine, some potential, he's just giving suggestions. He's just asking questions. So we'll also cover that. Hopefully, we'll have enough time for all of that. Joining me today are Marco and Richard. Welcome to the reality show. And so, just to set it up, basically, as I said, there were petitions to the Supreme Court basically asking for Israel to resume the humanitarian aid going into Gaza, which actually the Supreme Court of Israel has struck down, or has basically rejected them, saying Hamas is still the governing part, or the government of Gaza, and there is no legal obligation. And they said even under international law to provide aid, and I think they even said something, even specifically aid that could end up in the arms of your enemies. So I definitely great ruling. I think we just need one step further, basically saying that sending aid to your enemy is also unconstitutional, but that we have to wait for that. Marco, what do you make of this decision, and also of the basically the petitions for Israel to start sending aid again?
Yeah, well, we should also add that sending aid to your enemy is not only stupid, but is immoral. It goes against your interests, therefore it's not good. But yeah, I tend to love this kind of cases when the psychoepistemologies of lefties and the people working for various non-profits meet reality, really. When the case and the make believe is challenged, reality actually says, no, no, you don't make any sense. And that's one of the statements coming from this pronouncement from the courts, that they actually said that the lefties, I don't think they call them lefties, but their portrayal didn't represent what actually was going on the ground. So the IDF is actually risking the life of soldiers in order to provide the logistics and allow the pouring of aid into Gaza. And despite this, the lefties wanted more. The human rights institutions, the usual UN fan-backed and various leftists from all over the world wants more in order to help Hamas. What Israel is doing is not enough. And we've seen this kind of outcome playing out across the world, really. Every time there is somebody who goes to court because argues he is a woman who's actually has got mustache and beard, often the law says, no, I'm sorry, you're not. And all this kind of stuff, all the environmentalist stupidity, all this kind of stuff is tested in court every time, comes back, and they're effectively shown that these people, despite how much they would like Palestinians to be the good guys, how much they would love to help Hamas and pretend that Hamas is actually a humanitarian institution rather than a bunch of terrorists, well, they're proven wrong, aren't they? And this was another case. So it's just good to see that reality in the end comes out.
Yeah, and it seems like the those sitting on the Supreme Court had slightly different views, or at least a very slight variance on their reasons for judging all the same in the same way for rejecting this petition from this unholy alliance of lefties, humanitarians, and Hamas supporters. So it's it's interesting to look at the different reasons they gave as to see what the those reasons are. I mean, they include things like the fact that Israel's already giving aid, and whether it, and of course, I think the key thing is that they present this as the most moral army. This all comes under the most moral army umbrella, and this is the umbrella under which morality is treated solely as altruism. Those words being interchangeable in this context, and of course, that's what we as objectivists reject. Because supporting the principles of your enemy is going against your own principles, and therefore the morality of feeding your enemy is going against your own self-interest, and all of that is going to, as one of the justices pointed out, I can't remember whether he was the chief or not, pointed out that it was creating a lengthening the war, perpetuating the pain and suffering by giving aid to an organization such as Hamas, which is going to steal the aid, and therefore it's going to continue the pain of the war, not alleviate it. So he pointed out that aid that falls directly into Hamas's hands is an oxymoron. Because it doesn't become humane, it becomes predatory. It becomes a means of continuing the war, and of course, so to claim that Israel must supply this aid, would go against the state itself and the people of Israel. So that combined with the fact that this argument about whether Hamas has a functioning government or not, and that being a valid factor in whether Israel should provide aid, if a territory has no functioning government and therefore it is truly occupied by another country, like a country that's invaded it, for example, then the argument is that the aid is required by the occupied, needs to be supplied by the occupying country. But one of the justices pointed out that Hamas does have a functioning government, albeit an evil one, albeit a hideous one, and therefore it's not Israel's responsibility to rectify the evil of Hamas by supplying aid, which ends up going to Hamas, enabling them to perpetuate that evil.
Now, going into some of the statements, as you alluded to, Justice Solberg said, senior IDF officials coordinated logistical and security needs to ensure the frequent and large-scale transfer of humanitarian aid to Gaza, basically implying that Israel sort of going to that moral argument, or what is viewed as the moral argument, the fact that Israel has went far and beyond what any country did in a war, basically trying to provide aid to the basically enemy civilians, which I think goes to the fault of Israel, but it's not necessarily for the again, we'll go a little bit later into sort of the Supreme Court things and the changes that might happen to the Supreme Court. But basically, Supreme Court should never be some sort of a moral compass, even when it comes to any proper nation. It should just look at in the case of Israel, it's they don't have a constitution, but they have the basic laws. It should just look at the basic laws, say, is this action in accordance to that? If yes, it's okay. If not, take it out, and if it doesn't have an answer, it can rule. But basically that should be the only role of this Supreme Court. Basically this what is the role of the judiciary is always just overseeing what the laws are and are they in according to the Constitution, and the role of the Supreme Court is just that sort of that final decider when the lower courts either disagree between each other or yeah, somebody wants to appeal it further. Now going into, I think this is Justice Mitz. He said, or they said, even if there is a legal basis for allowing humanitarian aid to uninvolved civilians, there is no obligation to provide broad, unlimited aid nor dual-use materials that could reach enemy hands and be used against Israel. The IDF and the respondents have gone above and beyond to facilitate aid to Gaza, even at the risk that it could be seized by Hamas and used for its for its war efforts. In this regard, I agree with my colleague Justice Solberg. As noted, the provision, scope, and nature of aid are matters for the government and the IDF's broad discretion, and there is no justification for judicial intervention. And yeah, this seems like the sort of the perfect thing that basically Supreme Court should say. There is no, we don't have to do. We are not some sort of like supreme rulers. The government itself should have a lot of discretion when it comes to sort of even deciding on this. Now, in my instance, Israel shouldn't provide any aid to Gaza, and that should be something that should potentially not even be allowed. But if it's not in the foundation documents of Israel, it needs some different law to change that. Anything else you guys like to say on this, Marco?
Well, yeah, you kind of said it. If anything else, it's an operational decision of the executive. So, nobody else should actually intervene to that. And of course, we've seen what happens to the aid given to the Palestinians. Either they leave it there because they're too high and mighty to accept help from Israel, or it gets stolen by Hamas. And then, often soldiers actually get injured while they are supervising the distribution and the logistics of it. So to go to court and argue that Israel should do more humanitarian aid is just not just wanton waste of judicial time, but it's also really attacking Israel from within and trying to again help Hamas from whatever position they can. So whoever's behind this challenge, to be honest, they should be kicked out or moved to Gaza, given that they love Hamas so much, and let them experience the kind of stuff that they've been fighting for.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can talk generally about the role of the Supreme Court in terms of a check and balance against the executive, for example. But I mean, this use of lawfare, even lawfare within a country, to get your own way, as opposed to analysing a particular case for its specific merits. When you're trying to effectively change the entire principles of a country in this way, it seems completely balmy, to be honest. And it is a problem with this notion of having a Supreme Court and no constitution. I mean, obviously the UK is in a similar problem. And of course, by this point in time, with the current culture that we have both in the UK and in Israel, the idea of actually writing a constitution and agreeing one terrifies the crap out of me, quite honestly, because I know that it would embed in that constitution some of the worst current elements of the culture were it to be written right now. And therefore it would cement them there and be far harder for them to be overturned subsequently. Now, although the end goal would be to have a system closer to the US, where you have a written constitution that the Supreme Court then refers to and defends, and takes judgments in relation to that written constitution, as opposed to being reliant upon previous judgments in previous courts and the full woolly nature of that, which allows for laws to change with a pendulum swing of left-right governments, and all of that is that's the problem we're in at the moment. But again, as we constantly point out on these shows, politics being downstream of culture and people not having philosophical principles at the base of their thinking, then ploughing in at the end of the line with amendments here and there to how things function is just going to provide a castle of sand ultimately, which won't survive because those principles aren't solid and clear at the beginning. I mean, even the US suffers from not having had those principles as clearly laid out as possible. Something we've been discussing on the Constitution course every Thursday for Reardon Metal members and above with James Valiant. The problems with even the best of the systems in the world, the US system. But here we're looking at something far more inferior on a parallel with the UK.
Yeah, just to give you, as a country that did have sort of a modern constitution, since my country, Slovakia, became independent only in 93 and had a constitution to write. So we have things like the fact that international agreements are part of the supreme law, basically are, in a sense, part of the constitution. We have things that, like, basically all natural resources, all underwater, basically water, all caves are part of the national heritage of Slovakia, so cannot be basically held by individual. So yeah, when it comes to sort of trying to write a constitution in modern times, it's usually a mess of the sort of progressive era of what basically should a country should sort of a country's responsibility be. Not to mention even interpretation. I mean, you could have again in Slovak constitution we are a secular state, yet the religion has a lot of influence on the Slovak government and has certain parts of the government even tied to religion, or basically parts of your taxes always go to religion. So again, you could have a constitution, but if you don't have the sort of principles that allow for proper interpretation and also knowing the spirit of the constitution, that is also very dangerous thing to be. That's why in America, if you get five Supreme Court justices that simply do not care about the actual text of the constitution, there goes your constitution and interpretation. So let's move on to the changes to the Supreme Court. Basically, for those who remember, before October 7th, we've covered, or basically a big deal of the new government was to change the way the judicial appointments are made in Israel. I'll cover a little bit how it works now and what the changes are going to be. We might not talk too much about the specifics, since none of us are from Israel, and none of us can as precisely talk about the specifics, but I think we can talk about some general things, what a Supreme Court's role should be and how should a proper separation of power work. But basically, so that change that was supposed to happen before October 7 was stopped because of October 7, but now they finally passed something. Now it's a different from the what it was supposed to be back then, and it might still face some of the challenges. And even if it does fully go through, it will only take effect when the next Knesset election happens, which should most likely be in 2026, I believe, October. Now, just to mention about how it works right now, or how it worked before, basically the way Supreme Court justices or any justices are appointed in Israel is that there is a separate committee that is created for these appointments. Now, this committee consists of 9 members, with basically three of them are from the Supreme Court itself. 2 of them are lawyers from the Bar Association of Israel. 2 of them are coalition members, and 2 of them are members of Knesset, usually one from opposition, one from coalition, meaning directly the people in the Knesset are only have a small or basically do not have the majority, and the majority is actually held in the people that are already serving in the Supreme Court or are not elected. Now, what the problem that people on the right are saying with this is that there is basically this sort of elitist control of the Supreme Court, basically this sort of like a coalition in the Supreme Court, basically sort of like appointing our own people, or the people that agree with our ideology, which in their mind basically makes it so they cannot make any changes and everything keeps getting shut down. And basically that was the problem. um, I'm wondering, should I go to the what are the new things now, or do you guys want to comment on this?
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, so with the change. Oh, and I should mention, basically for the lower courts, the amount of votes needed was just simple majority, meaning the Supreme Court and the Bar Association, if they agree, they can fill pretty much any court they want. only the Supreme Court, it requires 7 votes. So they would always need at least few votes, either from the governing coalition, well, pretty much always from the governing coalition, because the opposition usually has 1 member at the most. Now the way they changed it is it's still gonna be 9 members, but it's gonna be nobody from the Supreme Court is gonna be there. 4 government appointees are gonna be there. 4 members from opposition, and sorry, 2 members from opposition, 2 members from Knesset, and 1 representative of the Bar Association. Now, you can pretty much ignore that representative of the Bar Association. He pretty much doesn't even matter. The way it works now is the government itself can pretty much appoint lower courts however they want. And when it comes to the Supreme Court, they just need agreement from some of the opposition. Anything you guys like to say on that?
Well, this is an issue that matters for Israel because effectively the Supreme Court and the courts generally tend to strike out legislation which is passed by Knesset. So the legislative body produces a piece of legislation, and then the judiciary strikes it, effectively acting as a legislative body, overriding what the elected people have done, and that's why this issue matter. And of course, it's a convoluted set of problems that actually get together and meet at one point, because partially is the problem of not having separation of power like the United States. The moment that your prime minister is a member of the legislative means that the executive is part of the legislative. So already you have a mess there that is not going to resolve itself very favorably. Then you have activism from the left, which tends to take over the judiciary. We've seen it in the United States, we've seen it in Europe, we see here in Britain for sure. And so you have effectively political activism in the judiciary, which should be just there to make sure that the law is followed. And then you have this problem, which means that you setting up a new state, a new constitution, you have something that human minds in the form of the US Constitution has created, which is more or less perfect. It can be improved, of course, as Richard pointed out, but you have a beautiful piece of way to create and have a state which worries about protecting the individual and define a pretty good solid way of managing the state as a whole. Now, you could take that as a basis and adapt it, but now Israel comes up with something totally different, and they don't even have two chambers, for example, in the legislative, which makes it even more awkward trying to debate legislation. Yes, Israel is a smaller place. I think they got only, how many members are they?
120.
Yeah, it's a pathetic number. I mean, politician-wise, certainly compared to the European Parliament.
Not that you want loads more necessarily.
No, absolutely no. If you're a politician, the better. But the point is that not having a kind of check and balances within the institution itself with a second chamber, that causes a few problems in itself. So yeah, effectively, it's a big multi-layered mess which could be sorted out with a bit of rational thinking a bit of philosophy of law in order to redraw the whole structure of the of how the powers are organized. But being the way we are, well, I realized that Netanyahu's got a problem. He's got activism on the side of the judges, so he has to do something about it. But of course, pragmatism, dealing on an individual basis, dealing with problems as they come up, is never gonna sort what the real issue is. And the issue is here, the separation of power has to be implemented, and you have to have checks and balances to make sure that Not the state is protected, but the individual is protected.
In a word, it's a giant bodge, isn't it? Bodge is the word that comes out for me in this, and you've got to ask what the motive is really, because getting lost in the weeds of how convoluted it's come up with, so it kind of disguises the motive, which is either to politicize it more or to neuter it against from being against you politically. That's clearly what's going on. And if you can see this within the context of what recent events such as the firing of the Shin Bet head Ron Barr and the firing of the Attorney General and all those kind of things, and of course Netanyahu's current worries. Now you can get bogged down in the weeds about Netanyahu and his particular cases and all that kind of stuff. But that's just the current example of the problem. And whichever political side tries to solve any of these problems in this crude bodge kind of way ends up making it worse for themselves down the line anyway. And it's the wrong way of approaching it, isn't it? I think, I mean, for example, one of the things that they proposed is that when there's a disagreement about appointing particular judges for the Supreme Court, that they both sides propose three candidates, and they have to accept at least one of the three candidates to the position. All that's likely to do is create more partisan members on the Supreme Court, and the whole point is that it's not supposed to be, partisan. It's supposed to be objective. The law is supposed to be objective. It's supposed to apply equally to everybody. And as Marco pointed out there, it frequently doesn't because of the lefty infiltration of the legal system. We've got the current problem in the UK of two-tier justice and some of the legal announcements, laying out quite clearly that there is two-tier justice. And now the executive is likely to come back again and have to correct the information to the judiciary in order to make sure that there isn't two-tier justice. We hope that does happen. It's not happened yet. It's just a lot of words about it. But anyway, that's the UK. What can we say? I think some of the things that are scheduled to come down the line in the future are also worrying when it comes to the ultra majorities required or absolute majorities required to make changes. The fact that a piece of legislation could be rejected by the Supreme Court with one of those supreme majorities, one of those absolute majorities, and yet still be returned back to them by essentially voting again or being reformed within the judiciary, within the legislature. All of that, it's messy and it's worrying. And it's the fact that it's being done motivated by pragmatism, motivated by the expediency of right now for the benefit of who's in government right now, to be used or abused, overturned, upset by the next government. And the whole point of the judiciary is that it provides stable continuity, that it's a bedrock against the tyranny of the majority, against the swings of the mob voting through Parliament and trying to change an entire nature of a country. That's what you don't want. That's what the judiciary is there to lessen that effect of.
Yeah, and sort of going into basically even like having a constitution or sort of having that change. I mean, it's important to remember, even for the United States, it was not like all of the founding fathers were like, yeah, we all agree on every single thing and we know what we're gonna do. No, you had huge two factions. You had the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists arguing even against the Constitution itself, and basically only sort of started supporting it after the Bill of Rights, or after the Bill of Rights was promised, basically. And those two parts, like, I mean, imagine the Constitution without the Bill of Rights. We are talking about a much different society, a much different type of government. Again, Bill of Rights means like First Amendment or the Second Amendment or all of the following ones. And so, that is sort of basically Constitution does require basically both, in a sense, both sides or all sides of the current sort of population to agree on it. And having something like that happening right now, well, for one, it's not like either side is pro-liberty or even in many cases pro individual rights, and that I'm not even talking about Israel specifically, but basically across the world where that was different in the United States. So we are sort of going back to the politics of like how do we even get out of this mess? Because as you mentioned, Israel is very lacking in the separation of powers, and for that matter, pretty much most nations besides America are lacking in the separation of powers. Because what you usually have is whoever wins the election, it doesn't matter which election, is both the head of the executive and the head of the legislative. Basically, the prime minister is both the head of government and sort of the head of the political party that is currently ruling. So you already have this sort of merging of these two things that should be separate. And this is even, I don't know how it is in the UK, if you can be the member of cabinet and member of parliament at the same time, or do you have to Oh, you can. So that is even worse. Well, so Slovakia is ahead of that. Basically, you have to leave the parliament if you want to be a part of the executive. But basically, this is also not the case in Israel either. You can technically there is like a suggestion that you should step down as basically a Knesset member if you are part of the executive, but it's generally not enforced or is not required. And now imagine if this new thing passes through and you have someone who is a Knesset member who is in the executive and is also part of this committee. So you have imagine if you had someone who made a law, you broke that law, he would arrest you, the executive, and then he would put you on trial. He would be also the judiciary. I mean, talking about it wouldn't be literally the same person, but basically these powers are completely going in together. And again, the point of the separation of powers is to prevent government overreach, is to prevent one election completely changing the scale of what's happening. That's why you have the sort of two separate chambers when it comes to legislative, or you try to have. That's why we try to have independent Supreme Court, so they, it's not just straight up, you elect a new government and you suddenly have a complete difference there. Um, so yeah, sort of, I'm really trying to think what I would even recommend to Israel, but we are in a really problematic place where pretty much anybody who suggests any sort of change to the political system is doing it for political reason. We had a similar thing in Slovakia. Somebody wanted to basically we have similarly to Israel, there's just one election, and based on proportional system, the people get elected into parliament. And somebody was rejecting, somebody was proposing going, I guess, closer to sort of the British system, which is basically you just have a bunch of local elections, and all of them send one representative uh, to the parliament. But when that was proposed in Slovakia, everybody who would benefit politically from it supported it, and everybody who wouldn't who would suffer politically from it rejected it. And the question is, okay, everybody's doing it for political reasons, but where is the actual discussion if this would be something that would benefit some certain goal? I mean, there can be different reasons for sort of changing the system, but and you have that similar thing in America. People arguing against, for example, abolishing the electoral college. You only have Democrats supporting abolishing it, and then you only have Republicans sort of fighting to preserve it, and you have very little people on the Republican side saying no, we should abolish it, or the Democratic side saying we should preserve it. So what do you do in that scenario where everybody is literally doing it just for political reasons? And that's what you oftentimes even hear when it comes to this change to the Supreme Court is people are saying, well, the judges have too much power, and they are overruling. But there needs to be a Supreme Court. You cannot just because it's inappropriate right now, or just because they are striking you down more, you cannot just argue for that, because then you destroy the whole system, and it only takes one actual authoritarian to be able to completely take it over. And this is what we're experiencing in Slovakia right now. Like, what happens when somebody really says, no, I want to be authoritarian and I do not care what anybody says. What do you do then? Marco?
Yeah, I mean, the solution is not political. The solution is philosophical. It's about ideas. Ultimately, the United States is such a brilliant system, not because it sets the powers apart, but because the powers apart are designed as the purpose is to stop the state from becoming too big and to stop anyone who gets control of the state to infringe individual rights. And that's the ultimate principle should be underlying any political system. It doesn't matter what it looks like, 3, 4, 5 chambers, I don't care. As long as the main principle of whatever state you're setting up is to protect the individual, it doesn't matter what politically it looks like. And ultimately, if you set up a system which protects the individual, ultimately it comes just down to a selection of which system it guarantees that no dictator can rise to power, that no majority can decide, okay, let's all vote for a Hitler, that kind of stuff. So by guarantee the basic principle of individual rights, you automatically, you're halfway there. It doesn't matter what structure you in place, as long as those structures are designed to serve the ultimate underlying principle. And that's what the only way out of this mess, really. But because of the kind of morality that Israel is following, which is altruism, it ain't gonna happen, is it? We're seeing here in Europe what a mess it is, with the kind of pragmatism we're going down with, and yeah, but we're not gonna stop from banging on about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the partisan lens with which all of these things are looked at through, isn't it? And the fact that, for example, Ayn Rand talked a lot about analogies with mathematics and algebra. And I think that's kind of relevant here. For example, you can take a party on the left or right and replace them with an X or Y. You can take the policies they're in favor of or against and replace them with A and B. And by stripping away the specifics of which party you're talking about or which policy they're for or against, you can then get to the key principles of how a system should work in order to be fair, without being distracted or focused on the particulars of the current case or the current obsession that you're currently focused on. And that's the way to get to principles for those people that seem to struggle with the concept. I mean, it should be pretty basic, but it's been so lost in the fact that people look at everything as its own separate individual case, even if legislating in one particular way for it then contradicts something very similar that they want to take the opposite view on. And that is all about the abandonment of principles and not understanding how your thinking fits together, which is as relevant in your own life as it is in how to run a country, which is one of the key things that Rand was always pointing out.
Yeah, and that's the sort of the biggest problem with the political systems, that where people do argue for, where people basically do want to just ram it down the throat of the other side. Basically, oh, do we have 51 or in Israel, oh, do we have 61 Knesset members? Well, we should be able to like pretty much do whatever we want with the other side and completely screw them over. There should be certain things where, no, maybe you need more people. Maybe you need the 76 votes or the 91 votes or however it takes when it comes to sort of the more important things. Because, yeah, when it comes to certain changes, you do want them to be slower. You do want them, even if, individually you might suffer in some cases, or basically you might not get to something you want for some time. That is the compromise we take in order to not shoot each other with guns. Because once you have a system that one basically is not unchangeable, then you have people going into violence. And once you have also a system that is too easy to change, and from one day to the other things are changing, then yeah, also somebody will get angry. So there is that sort of compromise we have to make when it comes to making a political system, and that is to allow basically a, I guess, plurality of sort of opinions.
Yeah,
Well, yeah.
as long as the compromise is made on the kind of government rather than the principle of the government. You don't compromise on the principle, you compromise on the details.
And it kind of relates to similarly to even the recent, they had a conference, didn't they, about anti-Semitism, which proved to be quite controversial, with different figures from the far right being, discouraging other people from choosing to attend, even though that what the subject is being discussed is anti-Semitism. But because people like Jordan Bardella are there from the National Rally, Le Pen's party, therefore people like the chief rabbi from the UK choose not to attend. Now, you can look at the reasons for that within the political frame, but all of that becomes a distraction from the main issue, which is how do you, in the case of anti-Semitism, how do you ensure that it doesn't happen, and that each of the countries attending ensure that their Jewish populations within them aren't subject to it.
Now, we have somebody in the chat saying threshold for constitutional amendments need to be much more than 50%. And I believe that is true in some cases in Israel, that, yeah, basically you can, in some cases, amend certain parts of the constitution with just 50% or over, 50% plus one. And yeah, that is crazy. That is not constitution. That's just laws. That makes it no different than from just basic laws. It needs to be something harder. It needs to be something like, for example, in America. I mean, the idea that any amendment was ever passed, if you really look at what needs to happen for that, the idea that any amendment was ever passed is incredible to me. Especially when it comes to things like prohibition, the fact that prohibition was both passed and then appealed, although appealing is a bit easier afterwards. And yeah, that is also something that needs to change in Israel. The fact that there should be certain things where, yeah, you can change it, and you can, in a sense, overrule the Supreme Court, which is interpreting the Constitution. Is that you add something new to the Constitution? But if it really is something that only requires 50% plus one, then yeah, you have this. Well, neither side really can do anything, right? Like, yeah, the legislative can pass things, but Supreme Court can like shut down everything, even sort of changes, because it is so little. That is really a system that will not be able to survive for long.
Yeah, even in the fact that the Supreme Court judges sit until they're kicked out at 70-year-old of age, it doesn't make any sense. If you want a proper stability in the legislation, you need, like in the Supreme Court in the United States, a life tenure. So you guarantee a certain continuity across the years, rather than effectively creating new political positions, effectively, because you know that only political pressure will get you elected, and there's too much of a turnover. I think the average length of a Supreme Court judge in the United States is about 17 years or something like that, while it's much shorter in Israel.
I think it's more like 12 in Israel, 12 and a half or so is typical, yeah. But you have to reach a certain level within your profession before you're even eligible for it. So it makes a rather tight window, which, kind of neuters the principle you're trying to, install, isn't it?
Bonnie is asking, does Israel have some kind of informal constitution? I missed why you're referring to Israel's constitution. Maybe you mean the body of law. Well, they have the basic laws, which do serve as a de facto constitution. They do not have any ratified constitution. Maybe when I was saying Israel's constitution, I was talking hypothetically, like if it ever was one, and what it would sort of require. But yeah, as we said, the changes can be done pretty easily, and so it's not. It doesn't even the basic laws do not really serve as what an actual constitution would serve. Now, yeah, you mentioned the sort of like basically, yeah, the Supreme Court justices in Israel do
I think since we've got other topics, to touch on, maybe we should move on.
Well, we have three topics, which means 1 minute each of us. So there was a conference on combating anti-Semitism, and Netanyahu spoke there. He something he said that I found interesting. He said, standing with Israel and the Jewish people, or he said he thanked people for standing with Israel and the Jewish people against barbarism. He described anti-Semitism as a disease carried by barbarians, a war against the existence of Jews, and he also mentioned Hamas. And my only question for all of that would be if you do recognize that, I believe he also compared Hamas to the Nazis. If you do recognize that, if you do know that, why did we not do what is necessary? If there were actual Nazis in Gaza, is this the way we sort of would have acted against them? And that sort of really splits me apart if he really means what he says, or if he is just refusing to take actions against the Nazis that you would normally have to. Anything on that, Marco?
Well, I think it was just ad-libbing from a quote that Olaf Scholz, the former German chancellor, said a few months ago to him. But yeah, I'm not a great fan about this comparison with the Nazis because they're overused and they're always taken out of context. But yeah, I mean, we're talking about constitution. If you look at the basic laws of Israel compared to the basic laws of Hamas, I mean, come on. Uh, it's not going to take much. Hamas is saying we want to kill the Jews, and the basic laws of Israel say we want to have a peaceful relationship with every religion, every culture, and blah blah blah. So day and night there. But yeah, I mean, you can go down that comparison if you want, but it's a bit
Yeah,
dodgy.
and who is up in arms about the method and the appointees on the Supreme Court within Hamas? Because obviously there isn't one. At least, not in any earthly
It's
sense.
Allah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a fantasy. But I think one of the things that Netanyahu was talking about a lot within this conference was clearly the mistakes and errors of October the 7th in the first place. And I know there's been a lot of debate as to whether there should be a full inquiry and all that. But I think it's quite obvious what went wrong. It was at principles level once again. It was the fact that you mistakenly believed that what you thought was happening in Gaza would never allow for October the 7th. And of course it did. And that's the complacency at the root of it.
All right, I think we've covered that one. Let's move on. There was an attack in Lebanon. Basically, Israel has struck in the north, saying it was sort of in a densely populated area, to which the military has accused Hezbollah of cynically using the Lebanese population as human shields. The IDF will continue to operate to remove any threat to the state of Israel. And again, towards that, I would say this is a great thing. Israel should continue. Now, there is technically still a ceasefire with Hezbollah that Hezbollah has broken many times, and so technically I don't think it should be even in effect. But either way, Israel should continue acting the way it does. It should keep removing threats of Hezbollah from the north, and until something more permanent can be done about it, I think it needs to basically have presence in southern Lebanon, which I believe it still does. Marco?
Yeah, again, this was in response to two missiles thrown from Lebanon into Israel. One was intercepted and didn't even reach Israel. The other one was destroyed halfway there. Yeah, of course, it's part of the ceasefire. Netanyahu, you know, cleverly kept the option open to retaliate in case of Hezbollah doing something stupid, and they've been doing it since the beginning of the ceasefire. Really, what makes me laugh is that Hezbollah said, "Oh, the two missiles that were launched against Israel had got nothing to do with Hezbollah." Really, who else has got missiles in Lebanon? Well, whatever.
And also, of course, within the context of these attacks, Israel does what it always does, and it informed residents in the area to get out of a 300-meter, I think, radius of where they were going to strike, which slightly negates the point of striking once you're only hitting rubble. Although they did take out a major commander recently in of Hezbollah in Lebanon, whether that was in the same attack or a different one, I can't remember offhand. But either way, they're still decapitating the heads of this evil organization that is Hezbollah. So on the one hand, they are still doing the right thing in terms of making sure that they aren't gaining more power or allowing themselves to regroup during this ceasefire period, but not to the extent that's necessary to truly defeat them, which is why they're still able to, with plausible or implausible deniability, lob rockets at Israel.
I just add a funny story to this. I don't know how it fits, but it was in my mind for like a week, and I need to mention somewhere. I've seen a video of one soldier who was in Iraq. He was basically telling a story about how they had like set up a camp, the U.S. military, and they were getting mortared by some militants from the enemy side, and basically before they could triangulate over the area where the mortars were coming from, and they came there, the people were already gone, and just the empty basically like tubes were left there. So what they did is basically when they started getting shelled, they didn't respond to anything, and they let it go for a bit, basically letting themselves get mortared, not doing anything about it. And then after a week or so, they decided to immediately strike with airstrikes at the location where the mortars were coming from, and they stopped coming. So I don't know what do you want to make from that, and how to integrate it with the knowledge we have about Lebanon. I just want to see more Hezbollah people be gone, whatever tactics are going to be used.
That's why reports and inquiries and are irrelevant next to eliminating the force swiftly.
And moving on again, Russia has a plan, or we don't really know if this is serious or not, or what exactly it means. But basically, Putin has called now again, just to mention, for about 2 weeks, Ukraine has said they would accept the ceasefire, and we still have pretty much no response from Putin. But he said that maybe there can be, maybe the UN can oversee an election in Ukraine. Now again, I have no idea why this guy would even suggest that somebody else is sort of not doing elections properly. I don't know what this would even mean, if it would mean that all of Ukraine, including Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk, would also participate in those elections, or if they would be let out, not to mention all of the all the region that is currently held by Russia. I have no idea what would be even purpose of this election, since Zelensky is currently would most likely win, and even if he didn't, it's not like any sort of anybody else that would come up would be for some sort of a peace with Russia. So this is Marco, you can go.
Well, that's Putin being the clown that he is. I mean, he loves to troll everyone because we let him get under our skin rather than pummeling him. We let him get under skin, and he knows he can say this kind of stupid stuff because not only is an evil dictator, not only is a bully, but also he found so much soft ground on the other side. He's just having a field day, really, and it's just I can't believe that he is able to position himself in the world order the way he's done. We are so stupid in the West. It's just beyond belief. I
Yeah,
mean,
just to add again, Russia is like the economy of like Spain or some, sort of like a middle of the road European country. Nothing wrong against Spain, but basically it's a small economy. They should not be able to do. I mean, they literally cannot even beat Ukraine, and they cannot even swiftly beat Ukraine before they even started getting support from the West. So again, they are pathetic, and the fact that we do not, we still trade with them, for example, is simply pathetic on
they don't need to
the
do anything.
European side.
We've been doing that bidding since since the Soviet era. So what the hell? Why would he bother? He just pushes us, and we just comply like little soldiers. It's just beyond belief.
I mean, this proposal you just read out, Daniel, from Putin, it should have the legitimacy status of like a cartoon or a meme, to give it its Gen Z name. But it really is it's pathetic, isn't it? But of course, because so many people have been trained to consider the UN a neutral body, they fall straight into this trap. And this is yet further proof that the UN benefits only the likes of Putin. And therefore, it is the UN and Putin that need to be ended, not just the regime within Russia itself, because ultimately we are flagellating at ourselves and causing pain to ourselves by constantly using organizations like this to crush the morality which we're should be standing up for.
And of course, Xi Jinping, the other dictator, is having a belly laugh watching this and seeing how the West is reacting. So he's happy.
Yeah.
Uh, with that, Bonnie in the chat is asking, wasn't the Signal Gate attack on the Houthis back on March 15th? Do we know if anything was done since then? I don't think anything was done. I believe significant damage was done. I believe some of the important commanders within the Houthis were killed, that were targeted. So overall, definitely a success of an operation. Now I seem to recall that maybe something happened more recently, maybe today or
There were
yeah.
a few other strikes. I think the last one was on Saturday or Sunday or overnight. But the buggers are still there and they're still doing what they do. So yeah, well,
Yeah.
waste of ammo or what?
It's a start, but it's not clearly not sufficient.
With that, where can people find you and any last thoughts, Marco?
Find me if you can.
Uh, the Briefly Objective, the sister channel to this, link below for shorter form material taken from these conversations, added visuals to really get to the principles. Please, like, subscribe, and watch lots of them.
And we actually have a new study group starting this Sunday. It's on Leonard Peikoff's course, Unity in Epistemology and Ethics. It's just 4 lessons, so you can do it. Oh, if you just buy the ARCUK membership for 1 month, we can go through the whole thing. Now, the first session is going to be open to everybody. So if you just are part of the ARCUK mailing list, which you can go on the ARCUK website at the bottom of the page to be part. You'll get a link, and those sessions are 90 minutes long, and they are great. We just wrapped up the last course, and these things happen every Sunday, so you can join us for that. With that, thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching, and bye-bye.
Bye.